right. So tonight we're going to hear about understanding the athletic recruitment process with Katie Charles. Katie has been with Great Expectations College Prep for 11 years now. And prior to joining us, Katie worked in college admissions and athletics at multiple colleges around the country, including Dartmouth and the University of Georgia. She also coached at the collegiate level, ranging from Division III to Division I schools, and continues to help students with college counseling and the athletic recruitment process. So without further ado, I will hand it off to you, Katie.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Lorraine. Good evening, everyone. Yes, as Lorraine kicked us off here, we're going to discuss understanding the athletic recruitment process tonight. And as anybody who's been following the news, following ESPN in any capacity, you can see that the college athletics landscape is changing immensely. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about what this looks like, talk a little bit about the difference in divisions, what to expect in the recruitment process, and talk a little bit about how that landscape is changing so you have a better understanding of what to expect as your students head into this process. So first and foremost, we're going to talk a little bit about the divisions. So we have in the NCAA three divisions, Division I, II, and III, as of right now. We'll be interested to see if the 1A comes back in the next couple of years, given the current situation in higher education and athletics. But as of right now, we are still holding on to three divisions, Division I, II, and III. There are some additional opportunities to play college sports in organizations like the NAIA, which is the National Association of Intercollegiate Athletics. There's also the National Collegiate Christian Athletic Association. So there's a cohort of colleges that are part of that. And obviously, the junior college programs have their own set of rules and their own conferences. But tonight, we're going to focus primarily on the NCAA. These are both the most visible and the most well known in general. And so you get a little bit more understanding. If you're watching College Game Day or you're perusing ESPN, you're going to see these names pop up across a variety of platforms. And you're going to be able to see these schools and really understand this is what we're looking at. So we're going to start off tonight talking a little bit about the divisions, the differences, and what we're looking for. Obviously, between the divisions, there are some significant differences. But the number one thing you have to understand is the biggest misnomer in college athletics is that Division I schools are big schools and Division III schools are small schools and Division II is somewhere in the middle. While some of that is generally true, there are Division I schools with under 2,000 students in enrollment and Division III schools with 15 to 20,000 students in enrollment. And so the idea here is you might be, one, a little bit surprised at what division your schools are in, and two, it's worth looking at schools across all divisions based on what your student athlete and your family is interested in looking at. For Division I, Division II, and Division III, technically, the only thing that determines what division those schools participate in is a decision by the college board and the president to fund athletics at the level required by the division. So at the Division I level, most sports can offer, or at every sport technically, can offer athletic-based scholarships. And for a decent number of those schools, they used to have what we call head count sports. Now, this is changing slightly with the new legislation, but the idea here is they're generally speaking going to be schools with the largest budgets for athletics that are putting the most funds and money into that and doing the most for the athletes on the back end. So additional tutors, academic support, whole buildings, meals, all of that stuff. That's generally what you're going to see at the Division I level. It's all the glitzy stuff that you see when people are showing you the back end of a locker room at the college level. That's generally speaking at our top level of Division I. In Division II, we see a little bit more of a mid-range. That's a lot of our state associated schools. So for example, here in the state of California, majority of our Cal State institutions are actually in Division II. Outside of our flagship larger institutions, D2 is almost the entirety of the Cal State system. And then when we talk about Division III, those schools are not allowed to offer any athletically based financial aid. It is only based on academic and merit aid. Athletics do not factor into your financial aid package. Now, obviously, there's some pluses and minuses to both of these things. At the Division I, Division II level, where there is scholarship money associated, you can receive athletically based aid, but if you choose to not continue playing throughout 4 years, you lose that aid. At the Division III level, there is no aid associated with sports. It is all based on your academics and merit, okay, as well as need-based financial aid. So if you decide not to play, you don't lose your scholarship money at a Division III school. You would get to retain it as a general student. And so those are kind of the different things that we're going to be looking at. So the funding is number one. Number two is somewhat of their travel schedule. At the very high end of Division One, if you've been following anything that's been going on, you've seen that we have realigned conferences quite a bit over the last couple of years. And what that really means is now the conferences are no longer geographic. They are all over the country. So right now, the West Coast teams like USC and UCLA are regularly flying completely to the East Coast. They're playing Maryland and Rutgers and Penn State and Ohio State in conference, which means student athletes that are playing at the top end of Division One can expect to be traveling 3 to 4 days a week out of 7. It makes it incredibly difficult to be both a student and an athlete. So there is a little bit of understanding who you are as a student, what you think you're going to be able to do in the classroom, and really what's going to be best for you when we're looking at this. Talent level wise, if you can play at that level, it's obviously pretty cool to do. But at the same time, you also want to know what you're up against and to figure out what it is you're heading to college for. Because at that level, the experience is significantly more tailored towards athletics. High end of Division One, when you go to college, you may not get to choose your major. You may not get to choose your class schedule. You're going to be given a certain set of classes, a certain set of timing that you can be in class. You have to work around practice schedule, work around team film, lift, training time, all of that stuff. Because at the Division One level, you are an athlete first and a student second most of the time. As you work your way down, even into the lower end of Division One, now we're seeing a little bit more student life and balance. In Division Two, there is very much a balance. They are both much more regionally associated from conferences. There isn't a ton of travel outside of your region and your regular conference area. You don't see quite as much going on there. Division Two is much more concentrated, and even their national tournaments are completely regionally based to limit excessive travel and allow students to have a little bit more of a life balance. At the Division III level, academics come first. They're the place where if you have a conflict between class and practice, you're going to class. Your travel, some teams and some conferences do travel significantly, but they do their best to lessen the amount of missed class time to keep students in school. It's also much easier when you're out of season to take advantage of more things at the school. In Division III, you can absolutely study abroad. That's one of the things that can be a determining factor for many. You can do internships because while you might miss some training, your first priority when you're at a Division III school is the academic fit. So as we're moving through all of this, a couple of things that are currently still in play, but that will be phased out theoretically over the next couple of years. There used to be something we called the NCAA Clearinghouse. It has now changed its name to the NCAA Eligibility Center. And this is every school in Division One and Division Two has a certain set of core curriculum and class requirements that a student has to meet in order to be eligible to play college sports. So if you aren't above the threshold of GPA, and it used to be test scores, those have gone away, but we are likely to see testing come back as a metric for NCAA admissions as it starts to come back to colleges for a metric for general admission, okay? When you go through all of this, you have to register with the NCAA to ensure that your academics clear the baseline standards for whatever school that you're going to be looking at or playing sports at. The only people who need to do this are people who are planning to take visits to Division One and Division Two schools. So if your list is entirely Division Three, they don't need the clearinghouse done at all because it does not affect Division Three. Division Three, because there is no athletic scholarship, you just have to clear the school's individual academics in order to be eligible to play. At Division One and Division Two, you have to meet a baseline for the divisions. So it's a little bit more, to be fair, the academic standards are generally higher across Division Three. So it's harder to get into a D3 school than it is to meet the eligibility requirements for D1 and D2. But in Division One and Division Two, prior to taking any visits to campus, you guys need to have registered with that. You can register at any time, freshman, sophomore, junior year, doesn't make any difference. I will say don't lose your password because the NCAA is not great about resetting it, but you need to have that registration ready for visits. And then in the end of your senior year, you will send in your transcripts and certifying information to prove that you have cleared all of the hurdles and obstacles that you will need in order to be eligible to play at the college level. And if you don't meet the hurdles, that's when it becomes an issue with the school, and there's some additional options available there. But for the most part, this is a great way to make sure you're hitting your core curriculum, that you're qualifying for what they need at the college level. The great news for you guys as students in California who have the A through G curriculum requirements for college admissions anyway, those curriculum requirements for the state of California are already slightly above the general threshold for the NCAA. So if you meet your A through G requirements for the state of California and for the UC and Cal State admissions, you should pretty easily clear the NCAA eligibility standards. Next up, so recruiting rules by division. And this is where things kind of get a little bit hairy. Every single sport technically has its own calendar. But the idea here is there's a few things that you need to know about how this is going to work. A student athlete can reach out to a college coach at any time. But one of the biggest things we see from athletes is, hey, I've been emailing coaches for like a year, but nobody's getting back to me. And it's a sophomore or a freshman. And the response to them generally is college coaches at Division I and Division II are not allowed to respond to student athlete emails with anything beyond like a, hey, thanks for emailing us. Here's a student athlete questionnaire. Please come to our camp until usually the summer at the end of your sophomore year. Okay. And that's when most recruiting can start. There's a couple of sports that have slightly different timelines. And the NCAA rule book offers the calendar that shows every single sport and their calendars. So if you have a sport specific in mind, you can go take a look at the NCAA website, which is linked at the end of this presentation to see what your sports specific calendar is. But nearly all of our sports at the collegiate level, outside of, I think, football, basketball, and a couple of the smaller niche sports, cannot speak to student athletes until June 15th at the end of sophomore year. So if you're wondering why you're emailing or you're sending stuff out and you're not hearing anything back, it's because they aren't allowed to respond to you at this point. So fill out the questionnaire, consider going to camp if it's a school you're really interested in. But overall, just understand what the timelines are going to look like. Now, Division III, once again, because there is no athletic scholarship on the line, those coaches have significantly more freedom to contact student athletes pretty much whenever they feel like. However, I will tell you that Division III coaches right now are still worrying about whether or not their seniors are going to get their applications in on time. They'll be looking at their early decision rounds to make sure that their incoming class gets done. And they've probably started looking at the juniors, but they're almost invariably not looking yet at sophomores and freshmen unless it's a kid who's been hounding them and they're really on top of it. Division III, the staffing numbers, they're pretty much capable of running their in-season and then a bit of recruiting maybe a year to a year and a half in advance. But outside of that, you're not going to see a ton of response from the schools at the lower levels until at least junior year. So knowing that, we want to kind of go into this understanding what these divisions look like, what the recruiting rules look like. So if you're not getting responses or you're not hearing back from the places you hope to, understand that it's likely because they're under some kind of recruiting restriction from the rules. Now, this is always the biggest question for everybody is how do I get recruited? And I start every conversation I have with every athlete I've ever worked with with the slightly cliched commentary of you have a far better chance of going to college because you're a good student than you do because you're a good athlete. Particularly in the current state of affairs with college athletics, athletics can help get you in the door, but it is no longer going to be enough to get you through the process. You need to make sure that you are still maintaining what you need to do in the classroom. For almost 90% of our sports right now, a college coach cannot walk into their admissions office and say, I really want this kid if they are significantly outside of what the average student is expected to be doing coming into their school. So if you're looking at a school where the average GPA coming in is a 4.0 or better, then you still need to be in the same range as the athletes as the general student population. However, if you are the very best athlete in your class and you are off the charts good and that coach is recruiting you hard, there's probably a little bit more wiggle room. But that graph kind of looks like a reverse angle. The better you are at your sport, the little more leeway you're going to have from an academic standpoint. But if you're not the top player in your position in general, you're going to need to make sure that your academics align with the types of schools that you're interested in going to. And that's really the first place we need to start. Colleges do not have leeway outside of that. So while the NCAA sets a very minimal baseline for what your requirements are, each individual school will also set what their requirements are for student athletes. And generally speaking, it's pretty close to in line with the admissions for a general student. The benefit to athletic recruitment, particularly at the Division I level, is that you get notified much earlier. You'll know if you're going to be admitted. They'll help you clear all the hurdles and make sure everything gets where it needs to be. But it is not a guarantee. Athletics is no longer a guarantee for admission. Okay. Um, the second question we get from every kid is, when should I start? And I don't know how many kids versus parents we have on this because I can't see what our panel makeup looks like. But my answer to this question is you need to start when your student athlete is ready to do the work. When you're reaching out to colleges, when you're putting together a list, college coaches can absolutely tell the difference between a 15-year-old sending them an email and somebody's mom or dad sending them an email. The writing is different, the language is different, the thought process is different. And the colleges know that they're trying to get to know the student athlete in this process because that's the kid who's going to spend 4 years with them in theory. Spend 4 years on their campus, be a part of their program, impact their team culture, all of those things. So as they go through this, they really do want to get to know the athlete. And so it's incumbent on the athletes to be doing the work to be recruited. The other thing I tell a lot of students is if you don't have time to do this process yourself, then you do not have time to be a college athlete. The time management, the ability to balance academics, athletics, extracurriculars is incredibly important to being a college athlete. And it's a great habit to get started with now. So, creating your list of schools, reaching out to coaches, putting together the list that includes all of their emails, tracking when you're reaching out to schools. That's a big piece of this process and one that the athlete should be doing for themselves. Okay. The best way to contact schools, as we feed right off of that, is generally speaking still via email. College coaches, depending on the sport, there are some that have like a slight proclivities towards some social media recruiting. In particular, football, a lot of social media recruiting, mostly because the coaches it's an easy way for them to get a hold of a mass number of people because if you're looking at a football roster with 115 people on it, the coaches need to bring in 30 or 40 guys a year in order to maintain those numbers. And so social media is a very easy way for them to stay in contact with a ton of people. And that's a good way to do it. But they are one of the only sports that does primary recruiting via social media. The rest of the sports, email is still your best bet and not via a recruiting service. So if you are having NCSA or one of those other field level extravaganzas email for you, college coaches, half the time those end up in spam. And the rest of the time, the college coaches aren't 100% sure that the athlete that is sending from those organizations is actually interested in their school because both of those organizations are essentially set up to spam email every college coach in the country. So when something comes in, coaches are generally going to wait until they see a personalized email of some variety from an athlete before they're willing to really dive into the recruiting process. A big piece of this is advocating for yourself. There are thousands of colleges in the US that offer athletics. And so whittling down your list, figuring out what's a good fit, and then directly contacting the coach is the best way to go about this. Social media has become a big piece of kind of the hype portion of this. It's great for putting out your commitment. For some sports, it's a great way to kind of show interest. But at the same time, as a primary recruiting tool, if you're a college coach and you're walking around with your phone and you have it up to your nose because the videos are so tiny and pixelated when we're looking at an Instagram video, it's not a great way to get your information across. But YouTube is free. And if you have a Gmail address, if you take those videos and you put them in YouTube form, it's a lot easier for the coach to see it, particularly when they're sitting at their desk, right? It's now going to show up. They're going to be able to find you on the screen. It's going to be a much larger picture. That really does help a ton. Okay. And so we should know about that. What do you need to do before you start contacting schools? This is when we need to have a conversation. Mom, dad, athlete, potentially your coaches would be great people to bring in and have a conversation about what are you looking for? What do you want out of your college experience? Do you want to go somewhere where at the college level, if you go play college sports, you're probably looking at 4 to 6 hours of athletically related activity every single day, particularly in season. Out of season, you might be in the 2 to 3 range. Whereas if you're going Division III on the opposite end, maybe you're looking at 2 to 4 hours a day. It's a slightly less of a burden in terms of that time and a lot more flexibility. What do you want to do as an athlete? Are you okay going to a higher level program and maybe sitting the bench and never playing? Or are you hoping to find a school maybe at the lower end of Division I, D2, D3, where you could either work your way onto the court or field, or a place where you can make an impact immediately? And these are questions that every student athlete kind of needs to figure out. You need to sit down and take some time to decide what would make you happy because at the college level, athletics is a big commitment. And if you're going to do it, you want to do it right. And when you're going through the recruiting process, our goal should be that we are using athletics and we are planning to be a part of whatever team we are joining for all 4 years that you're in college. As we always joke with the coaches that we work with, is the college coach's life, livelihood, and ability to feed their families is dependent on the decision-making skills of 16 to 22-year-old kids. That's a very scary proposition for a lot of people. And so their job is to make sure they're bringing in people who want to be there, who are good fits for the culture, who are going to help their program, and preferably who aren't going to be super high maintenance. So if you're really struggling academically, if you're a kid that isn't necessarily going to make it at the school, they may opt to not recruit you, even if you're pretty talented. And those are things we need to be thinking about as we go through this process, because it is a really big piece of how this is going to work. All right. So here's the next piece of it. We've now talked kind of on your end of things, talking about what sports can do for you. Obviously, the kind of first big piece of all of this is athletic scholarships are a thing, right? For Division I and Division II right now, you can receive money that covers your tuition, your housing, room and board, all of those items. But with the change in NCAA rules, that isn't necessarily a given any longer. And that's something that we need to be very aware of as we're working through this. Receiving a scholarship obviously means that the school is investing money in you. And whether it's Division I or Division II, it means you are very much committed to being a part of their program. They are paying you. That is now your job. So we have to understand what that looks like. The good news is for a lot of people, most of our sports are what we call equivalency, which means you may not be receiving a full scholarship for athletics. You might get 50% for athletics. Now we are allowed to actually package along with merit-based aid. So if you're also a great student, you might get another 50% in merit-based scholarship and academic scholarship, or even need-based based on what your family has. Okay. And so you want to make sure as we're going through this process that athletic scholarship is great, but it may not be your only avenue to playing sports in college. There's some ways to go around that and some other things. So again, the better your academics, the more likely you're going to receive some kind of aid from that process. Okay. And when you get to college, scholarship means like you are expected to be there. Nothing is optional. You will be in the gym doing or on the field, in the weight room, doing everything that's being asked of you by the coaching staff whenever they ask it. It is, no matter what division you choose, basically a full-time job. So just go in understanding that this is what you're expecting. Okay. When it comes to the commitment side of things, colleges can start offering opportunities to play at their school again at the beginning of that junior year at time. Okay. And as they go through that, everything until you sign your financial aid paperwork for the actual college, which hasn't happened until your senior year, is a verbal commitment. That means it's exactly as good as the paper that it's written on. If a coaching change happens, if the coach changes their mind, they can relinquish that commitment at any time. Now, generally speaking, that doesn't happen. Most coaches are very good about if a coach leaves, the next coach honors the commitments that are made. It does happen every now and then, but it also makes the news generally every time it does happen because it's not necessarily considered good practice at the collegiate level. Okay. But just understanding there are extenuating circumstances to getting out of a commitment. And quite frankly, the athlete can also change their mind anytime up until they sign on the dotted line. Okay. On here, I have listed NLIs. So the National Letter of Intent used to be a huge program. Every November, there was a signing date. That's when you signed your paperwork that said you're receiving a scholarship and all of that. It has officially gone away. We don't technically have NLIs anymore. Now you are signing whatever your financial aid considerations are. And we're going to talk about why that has changed recently because the new legislation, we'll get into that in a later slide. But understanding that there's no longer like that pretty little signing day, like a lot of people still do the social media slash, presentation portion of it, but they're mostly signing a blank piece of paper because the actual paperwork that goes with this actually doesn't come out at that time any longer, and it has changed what it is. So it's a little bit more of a free for all than it used to be. The other thing is here, understanding committing doesn't necessarily mean you're receiving a scholarship. So if you are talking to a coach, you need to understand what you are receiving and having them outline whatever this commitment, whatever you are committing to. Because student athletes that are considered walk-ons are also recruited and can go through the commitment process. Being a walk-on simply means you are not receiving any money for athletics. Now, that means the entirety of Division III is considered a walk-on. They are recruited walk-ons, but they are walk-ons because they are not receiving athletically based aid. And you'd be surprised, a pretty decent chunk of Division I athletes are also walk-ons. There is not enough scholarship to cover every athlete at the collegiate level. And so understanding that you're still very likely, unless you are very, very top end athlete, to have to pay something to go to college, even to play sports. Okay, so now we're going to get into all of the fun stuff. And this is, if you've been following this via ESPN, there's probably been 100 different takes on what's been going on. But just this past year, I believe the official word came out at the end of April, early May, is the NCAA has changed a few things when it comes to how athletics works at the Division I level in particular. Okay. In this new era of NCAA legislation and the name, image, and likeness era, there have been some massive changes. So there was a lawsuit went through, and there were three prongs to the lawsuit. The first one doesn't really have anything to do with the current round of athletes, but it's the NCAA owes about $2.8 billion in back pay to athletes all the way back to 2016 for the use of their name, image, and likeness and the loss of revenue based on what they could do. That's kind of neither here nor there, but it is the basis of where we started this lawsuit. So the second two pieces of that lawsuit were that at the Division I level, colleges used to be able to have as many athletes on a roster as they wanted, but their scholarship and the money they could give out was limited by the allowance of their sport. So in football, for example, they used to be able to have as many guys as they want. And a lot of college football rosters were sitting between 140 and 160 guys, but they could only have 85 of those guys on scholarship. And the other 60 or whatever the number would be had to be what we would consider walk-ons. They could receive no financial aid. Well, the NCAA changed that, and now you can have everybody can receive scholarship, but you can only have 105 guys on the football roster. So I work a lot with women's volleyball. We used to be able to have 12 scholarships, but an unlimited number of people on the roster. Now we can have 18 people on the roster, and that's the cap for scholarships, but we can't have any more than 18. Now we're currently in like a weird period where there are some rosters that are above the cap because student athletes were already there when the legislation went through and they're going to grandfather people out. But by the time most high school athletes get through this process, that will no longer be the case. And the roster limits will be hard and fast and set where they are at. We're unsure if the NCAA will set a time to reevaluate whether or not that's enough people on a roster, but as of right now, that's where we're at. And it has made a pretty significant dent on a lot of sports. Like I said, football basically had to tell like 35 to 40 guys that they no longer had a spot. So they all transferred, which is sort of where we get into the rest of the stuff that's going on here. The bottom piece on here is the transfer portal. So now all of those athletes that were playing at the college level but weren't in the top 105 or whatever it was going to be for their sport, most of them jumped into the transfer portal and went elsewhere, which means we now have a huge influx of athletes that already have college experience competing against kids that are in high school right now for spots on teams. And so there has been a massive crunch when it comes to the large roster numbers and how all of this is working. Okay. So the second piece of this is the change to funding. So it used to be that, you know, the NIL stuff that came out in the last couple of years was like boosters could pay athletes, you could do advertising, you could use your name, image, and likeness to essentially take a salary or to earn money, right? So now part of the NCAA settlement is that the colleges can directly pay athletes now. So essentially you can receive your scholarship, your cost of attendance, all of those things, plus a threshold of however many dollars you have available within your team's budget to pay athletes. Each school that has opted into this is capped at this year, it is $20.5 million is the maximum amount that they can pay out to athletes. And it's been very interesting to hear how most schools are handling it. As of right now, most schools are putting about 75% of that towards football, with like 10 to 15% to men's basketball, like 5% to women's, and then 5% to every other sport that is receiving some form of revenue sharing, which at some schools is only a few, some schools it's slightly more, and there are some programs that are getting zero extra dollars, so not much changes there. But knowing that there is now that ability for schools to pay makes a huge difference in how schools are recruiting, how they're handling things, and what's available to athletes. It's also going to be a massive changeover in terms of availability of sports. As of right now, most of our smaller niche Olympic sports are not receiving any funding, and it's hard to say whether or not those programs are going to even survive. And so we may see this whittle down to a lot less athletic opportunities, or programs and sports that don't have high participation may end up going club rather than staying varsity in order to be able to financially handle it. But it's just something to keep an eye on. So if you're not in one of the big, like what we would consider a tier one sport, which is football, men's and women's basketball, women's volleyball, softball, baseball, and generally speaking, sometimes soccer, you're probably going to have a hard time until the sports that really have an idea of what they're going to be able to do and how long their programs are going to survive. It'll be interesting to see within the next 5 years what that looks like. And it is absolutely something to keep an eye on from an athletic standpoint. Okay. The great news is we're about to take the second bullet point off of here. Pardon me. Because we are finally at the end of the COVID additional eligibility. Most of those athletes that had the extra couple of years, they are either just graduated this past year or in like the last semester right now. And so we're going to start to see those fifth or sixth year seniors drop off, which is great news in some ways. However, what they already created was kind of a backlog of larger rosters. So you can see where the crunch can come in here, right? We have to limit our roster size, and now we have a whole bunch of kids that are a holdover from the COVID era. And so when we take a look at all of these things, it is creating a pretty significant downward push on all of these, which means tons of kids are now entering the third point on here, which is our transfer portal, which means we are seeing a ton of athletes that are opting to change schools for the opportunity to potentially play. And it really has a lot to do with how the roster is being managed at their school, but it is making things incredibly more competitive. A lot of college coaches are like, well, I'd rather take a chance and pick up, I don't know, a kid who already has 2 years of experience with 3 years to go. And then you don't have as many incoming freshmen. It's going to limit the number of roster slots and the availability for athletics down the line at other programs. And it's pushed kind of downward in terms of high-end talent is now going to be playing in some of the mid-majors. The mid-majors will go down to the lower Division I, and we'll start to see the talent level spread out quite a bit. But it is something that you really want to be aware of because it could affect the rosters and the amount of athletes the school is recruiting in any given year. Add on to that, and it's not on here yet because the NCAA hasn't made it official, but there's pending legislation sitting out there where junior colleges, the athletes that go to JUCO, now their year or 2 years that they spend there no longer count against their NCAA eligibility the way they have in the past. And the other one is the NCAA is contemplating giving all athletes 5 years of eligibility. And so you could play for 5 instead of 4. And that's something we won't know more about that probably until January when the athletic directors take up that business at their next meeting. But it is something we're going to have to keep an eye on. And the athletics landscape is changing incredibly fast right now. And so if you're interested in going into, playing at the college level, you really need to be aware and on top of this and understand how it's affecting the sport that you're interested in. Okay, now that I've now rambled on and on and on, so we're in great shape. As we talked about a little bit earlier, the NCAA Eligibility Center, you guys can go in there. If you have any interest in playing at the Division I or Division II level, I highly recommend registering with the Eligibility Center just to have it started. Once you do that, you will receive back essentially your NCAA eligibility number. So when you talk to a coach, you can include that. You can put it on a student athlete questionnaire. There is a space for it on most of those. If a coach goes to schedule your visit to campus, you already have your NCAA eligibility number, and they can use that because then it can link it together, and the coaches will have the information that they need in order to handle the compliance side that they need to have on their end. If you're interested in finding out the calendars that are specific to your sport, ncaa.org, both the 300 and something page rules manual for recruiting. So if you really want to dive deep into it, that's the place to go. But the specific recruiting calendars are listed on ncaa.org. You can search for them on that website. So if you want to know what things look like, when can coaches be out recruiting, what is the general timeline for recruitment, that is all on the ncaa.org website. And you guys can see it specific to the sport that you participate in. Okay. However, if you want to learn a little bit more about the actual sports themselves, which schools are in the top 25, what are the general scores? If you want to follow the NCAA championship brackets or learn more about the schools that are playing in your sport, particularly for some of the smaller sports where you don't get as much visibility, go to ncaa.com. on that website, you can actually see, you can search by sport and then by division. So if you're interested in looking into Division II women's soccer, you go to women's soccer and then you go click on Division II, it'll show you, what their top 25 rankings are right now. It'll show you as we get a little bit closer to the fall championship time, what does their NCAA tournament bracket look like? Who's going where? All of that information is all there. Okay. So you can do a little bit of homework. For people who do individual sports like swimming, you can go see what the times are in the events that you swim. For golfers, you can see what the average score looks like for some of the courses and for teams that you're interested in playing on. So you can get a really good feel for kind of where you are in conjunction with what is being recruited in your position and sport. Okay. The other major resource that you guys should definitely be using are your coaches, whether it's your high school coaches or some kind of club or private coaching. Talk to the coaches and see where they think you might fit, right? Most athletes I've found have a pretty good idea of who they are and where they fit in the grand scheme of our sport. But when we talk about the potential to play at the college level, just understand for the average athlete, less than 7% of high school athletes will play sports at the college level. It just means you have to know kind of where you fall. And that doesn't mean it's only the 7 best percent, but it's the ones that pursue it, the ones that take the time to go through the process. It's understanding what that looks like and being able to target schools where you could be a fit and have the kind of experience that you're hoping for. And I can't stress enough that really thinking through that checklist that I talked about earlier, do you want to sit on the bench or are you someone who wants to play right away? What are the must-haves and the priorities for when you're going through this recruiting process? What do you want your student experience to be like? Because that should help you figure out what your target range should be. And your high school and club coaches are generally speaking going to be super honest with you and help you say, like, here's what might be a reach. Here's some schools that are really in your wheelhouse. Here's some places you can make a pretty big impact and really try to work with them to see kind of where you're at. Okay. There are a lot of moving pieces to this, but having resources and having essentially adults in your life who can help you out is a great way to get a little bit more information about how this is going to go. Okay. And they can also oftentimes high school, sometimes club, generally speaking, have some kind of contact with the collegiate coaching world anyway. So they might be able to reach out to a coach and say, hey, I've got a kid who really is interested in your school. Are you recruiting their position in that graduation year? And what are you looking for in a student athlete so that you can get feedback to better establish yourself for exactly what they're looking for. Okay. You can tailor what you're interested in. You can tailor what you're doing in the classroom right now or in your extracurriculars to make yourself a standout candidate for one of the schools that you're interested in. And the other one is get in and see your high school college center. You guys have some really fantastic guidance counselors who can talk to you about what previous students have done, what that landscape has looked like. They'll talk you through like, hey, NCAA eligibility wise, you're hitting X, Y, and Z. Hey, you might need to do these additional things in order to get eligible. They are a really great group of people and they will do the best they can to help you out, particularly on the academic side of this. And so it's very much worth getting in and seeing them and just getting an idea and feel for what you might be looking for. Okay. And now that I have rambled on and on and on, I will give you guys an opportunity to ask me some questions. I know we had some set in advance, so I believe Lorraine has a couple teed up here to go.
Yeah. And,
Also,
oh, sorry, go ahead, Katie.
oh no, I was just going to do the cleanup of this. So also on the screen right now, guys, we have a special partnership with Pally. So the QR code that you guys see in the bottom there, you can go ahead and screenshot that one, and it'll also be in the recording of this that you can receive. That will take you directly to our webpage for the Pally pricing and more information on those offerings.
Perfect. Thank you, Katie. And as a reminder, if you do have questions, you can enter those into the Q&A box, which is located at the bottom of the screen. If you add your questions there, we'll be able to ask Katie so she can answer them for us now. So the first question we have here is, what is the best way to get scholarships for athletics?
So the best way to get scholarships for athletics is to be really, really good. And that's where we always start this conversation when we're working with athletes is where are you at the top end fit? Because if you're a really good athlete, then there's a really good chance for receiving scholarship. But as I said, you still have a far better chance of going to college because you're a good student than you do because you're a good athlete. If you are hoping to receive scholarship, then you need to take a look at the schools. Are they Division I or Division II where they can even receive it? So that's one thing that we want to take a look at. Through that process, what is it that would help you get a scholarship? So speaking with the coaches, what are they looking for? How much money do they have available in any given year? What might they be trying to do with that recruitment class? Because that'll give you an idea. If the coach says, hey, your position is not our top priority in that class, then you might want to look at other schools where your position is a priority because they're more than likely going to put scholarship money towards that position versus just handing it out to anybody that they're recruiting. And the next piece of that is going to be like if you're pretty good, but you're maybe not good enough for a super high-end scholarship, taking a look at a school where you might be on the upper end of their talent level. That's a great way because if you're like, I could play at the big high-end Power Five, but I think I'd prefer a mid-major, there's a really good chance the mid-major would have and will willingly offer some scholarship money versus a Power Five conference school that doesn't necessarily need to do that in order to attract athletes.
Okay, great. The next question says, how often does the NCAA change the rules?
About every 6 weeks. I say that laughingly, but they do change things pretty regularly. Obviously, this current set of new legislation had been in the works for almost 3 years, and we just hadn't heard back from the judge for a very long time because they were hammering out the details. There are still quite a few legal challenges to the current new rules, so we still don't 100% know what we're going to be living under from that perspective. But every year, the ADs take up a certain um, schedule of changes, rules, and then the rules committee for each sport also takes up a change to rules, and then they make suggestions to the athletic director. So we usually have at least one annual vote on new rules by sport. Recruiting rules is a little over the place. Mostly there's a January athletic directors meeting where most of this gets hammered out, and then it takes 6 months to implement, usually with July 1st being the implementation deadline. But outside of that, it could take a little time. And the NCAA has mostly gotten their butt kicked in the legal system over the last couple of years. And so they're significantly less inclined to make more restrictive rules right now because they simply keep losing every time they get challenged in court. So, I mean, I'd like to say it's stable for a little while, but I doubt that's the case. And we'll have to see how it goes. It's going to be a brave new world for athletes over the next 4 to 5 years.
Great. All right. Thanks, Katie. The next question says,
Trying not to make this depressing if it really comes down to it, but they definitely need the awareness campaign here is going to need to be significant.
all right, next question is, how do you determine if you'll be a good culture fit for a team?
This is where things like visits, talking to the coaches, talking to current athletes, like the idea here is you want to find your people, right? And so when you're heading off to college, you want to feel like you fit with the people that you're spending time with. It doesn't mean everybody should be the same or exactly like you, but going and seeing like what are these athletes like when they're off the court or off the field or out of the pool? Do these people I want to spend time with? Because as much as it is anything else, these are the people whose weddings you're going to attend and kids you're going to get to know. They're going to be part of your college experience in your life. Get to know the coach. Watch a couple of games. What are they like on the sideline? Do you like their sideline demeanor? What do their current athletes say about them? So getting a feel for the program and the coaches and the current athletes that are there, even understanding that, if you're a current junior, you're only going to be playing with the freshmen and sophomores that are there, most likely during their time. So trying to get a feel for the underclassmen is a good way to go about it because the current crop of seniors you will never get to play with because they'll be graduating before you arrive. And so really taking some time to get to know that team is a great way to do it. Requesting from coaches like, hey, I'm going to be on campus. Is there a student athlete I can meet with, or can I talk to you? Requesting those visits when you're going to be on a campus visiting is a good way to go about it as well. They may not necessarily be able to accommodate it, but it's certainly worth asking and seeing where you are on their radar as well.
Okay, great. The next question is it safe to say that if you are playing for a D1, then studying abroad wouldn't be possible?
Depends on the D1, but for the most part, you need to be on campus year round. And most athletes, kind of no matter what their sport, are usually on campus during the summer too. And that's just something you need to be very much aware of. It's great because you can get ahead in terms of classes, but if you're a fall sport athlete, you're going to be there all summer taking classes in summer session 1 and summer session 2 for the most part out, and that's in the high end Power Five. There are some schools that will absolutely let you take a semester or a quarter and go, but they tend to be on the lower end of Division 1. So like Ivy League schools, generally speaking, will allow you to do that, right? Particularly the ones that are the quarter system, which is I think only Dartmouth at the moment. But they're like, yeah, go abroad, that's fine, go enjoy it. But if you are looking for that in your college experience, it is something you absolutely need to take into account when you are doing this from your research from your end of things too. Know what level they're at, know where those programs are in the grand scheme, because you do need to know what's allowable. Like some programs will allow you to do like a 6 week summer class overseas. That's generally speaking doable, but it just depends on how much it cuts into your actual athletic training time. And that's something that you need to be aware of. And a lot of times, college coaches will want you on campus during the summer to take some extra courses so that you can lighten your load during the actual season and manage it a little bit better so you don't have to take quite as many classes. That's all stuff that you have to hammer out with the coach. And it is honestly, if it's something you really want, it is a question you really should be asking the college coaches during your recruitment process. Like, hey, I'm considering going abroad. Is that something you allow athletes to do? What does that look like? Have you had any athletes go before?
Right. All right. The next question is, should you write about your sport in your college essays, and should your coach write letters of recommendation?
So, generally speaking, if you are being recruited for a sport, the school already knows that. So, you do not need to include it as part of your like actual application outside of adding it to your activities. I generally speaking, as a counselor myself, do not recommend speaking about sports in your Common App personal statement or even your UCs unless there is a very specific reason for it, like showing incredible leadership or overcoming an obstacle. And even then, athletics kind of gets overdone when it comes to the essays portion. And so I tend to steer kids away from it, even if they are athletes. They want to learn something about you that isn't about your athletics because they already know you can play a sport, particularly if you're being tagged by the coach as a recruitment prospect. They want to know what else you're going to bring to campus. And so you can do it, but it would not be at the top of my list of things that I would have a student write about if we were doing that process.
Okay, great. The next question says, after filling out the initial recruitment questionnaire, how often should you be emailing coaches to stay on radar? Any etiquette or rules around this?
My etiquette to this is don't drive them crazy. I've had some athletes that like emailed coaches every week, and the coaches are like, please tell them to stop. That's way too much. My rule of thumb for this one is be courteous and understanding of the season the coaches are in. So if they are in season right now, if they're a fall sport coach right now, please don't email them all that often. One, they're not going to have time to respond to things. And two, it becomes too much. They're getting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of emails a day. So making sure that you are thinking about what that's going to look like, particularly in season, because right now they're in practice for their longest stretches of time. They're traveling on the weekends. They've got a lot going on. So be courteous and understanding of what the coach's time looks like. I generally say email them when you have something to tell them. You have an academic update. Hey, I just got my first quarter grades and I have all A's. That's a great thing to send a coach, particularly if it's an academically related school. Hey, coach, we just won a massive tournament. I was named MVP. Send that away. You make your decision on your course selection for your following year. Let them know what that looks like. Hey, I just got my SAT or ACT back and here's my score. Those are all things that are worthwhile. I generally say try to save it up and send one, no more than maybe 2 paragraph email as a follow-up that says, here's what I've been up to, here's what I'm doing. An updated video with it if you have it, if you've been, playing, if you've been doing any extra, that actually can really be useful. But no more than once a month, unless the coach is engaging and responding and getting back to you and asking you questions and expecting responses. Once a month at that stage is a pretty good cadence to let coaches know what's going on, and particularly when you have something to update them with.
Great. We have a couple more. The next question says, what sports are harder to get scholarships for?
All of them. But I mean, it's really a matter of how many athletes are playing your sport and how many positions are available at the college level, right? Like there's some sports where it's going to be a dogfight. You know, basketball, there's so many kids playing. Football, there's so many kids playing. Volleyball, there's so many kids playing that it can be harder. And depending on the sport, they may not have as many positions available at the college level. So like sports, like I'll throw one out there, like that keep a pretty small roster at the college level. So like water polo, there's only, I don't know, 35 programs in the entire country. So even if you're pretty good, the chances of getting on a roster could be a little bit debatable depending on, what you're targeting, how good you are, what you're capable of, and how much money they have available. Because water polo, I think, is only carrying maybe 6 scholarships right now. And my guess is they are not going to get an increase to that amount because they won't be in the revenue sharing program. And again, it's a matter of like supply and demand, right? So if there's a ton of programs out there, but there's also a ton of athletes playing, that's one thing. I mean, there's always sports and programs that are just kind of looking for anything. The big example is there's not a ton of people who do rowing at the high school level. So we've had plenty of rowing programs walk around campus and take the tall kid that looks pretty athletic and be like, hey, would you like to be a college rower? Like that is absolutely something that has happened, but it's not very normal. You have to expect to go through the process. And there is no like it's easier or harder to get a scholarship here or there or anywhere else. It's all going to be a factor of your talent level, what a program needs, how much money they have available, and that's something that you won't know until you really dive into the process and start to get feedback and understand where you fit.
Got it. And this last question says, if an athlete who's also very good academically applies to a Division III school, does the does the athlete part increase his chances for an acceptance and scholarship?
Scholarship, no, because there is no athletic scholarship, and it will not factor into merit scholarship. So, like, technically, there is a firewall in Division III between financial aid and athletics. That's your admissions office. There's no conversation between athletics and financial aid at all. So that's technically not allowable. There's a little bit of wiggle room there in some places, but for the most part, there's pretty much a hard and fast separation between financial aid and athletics in Division III. However, it can help you with the admissions piece of it, depending on how the coach has you marked as a recruit. So if you are one of their very top kids, they may be able to get you like pretty much into school, assuming that you meet the academic criteria for admission, right? And they can start doing things like giving you an early read months in advance of that. And that is really the benefit of athletics, particularly in the Division III, is you can get notification of your admissions likelihood like 6 months before people are even applying, right? So a lot of those schools can offer what we would consider a pre-read on your portfolio. So they'll take your completed junior year transcripts, your test scores, your expected senior year class schedule, a resume of some kind, and they'll let admissions look at it in advance. And then from there, they'll say, yes, you're highly likely to be admitted. If you apply early decision, you're good to go. The next one is, hey, we might need to see you do X, Y, and Z in your senior year in order to get through. Or, hey, this kid isn't going to make it. And you'll know that in advance. But across the board, like if you're a very top end kid, a very top end athlete, the coaches have some sway, but not at every single school. So I can tell you like a local example. Caltech, there is no help from the coaching staff for any sport. They can only take athletes that are admitted under their own volition. Okay. And it really depends. I mean, we can run the gamut of if a coach says they want them, they can pretty much get anybody in to Caltech, where it's like whoever shows up, that's what our teams are going to be made up of. And Division III, there is no like hard and fast definition of what that looks like. It's mostly a program by program consideration.
Okay, great. Well, those are all the questions that we have for tonight. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Katie, for that amazing presentation. Thank you to Pally High for having us. And again, if you have any questions that come up later, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to pass those on to Katie. And we encourage you to book a free consultation with us if you have any other questions about the college process. And have a wonderful night. Thank you all for being here. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.